So we are on letter 2, Meditations on the Tarot, the High Priestess. And we've had the benefit of Mark's reading this and discussing it one other time, which is only slightly helpful, I will tell you. It's it's dense, shall we say.
It is.
But the few things I know I took away from it is that the High Priestess expresses the kenosis, is the this pure intellect of this. I don't know where to start. I can start with, I don't have to start at all, actually. Does anyone else want to start?
Well, I've now had the benefit of reading this about 4 times, this chapter, and this letter, and each time I get something new from it. It's just amazing. It's an inexhaustible piece of fruit, this book. It really is. I thought this was divided into 2 basic parts. I thought this might help us a little bit. The first part is talking about, the first half of it is talking about the two-ness, the quality of the letter 2, and embracing discussions about duality and unity and illegitimate twofoldness versus legitimate twofoldness. And it's a pretty important discussion about the dynamic of what he calls Christian yoga. The second part of the chapter is where he focuses on the image of the High Priestess herself. He moves from the number to talking about the High Priestess herself. And she is depicted as with a 3-tiered tiara, and she is seated, and this is important, and she has an open book. And the High Priestess, the symbol of the High Priestess, he basically summarizes the process of the work, the great work, which is the mystical level coming down in through our being into the Gnostic level, the level of gnosis, true knowing, and then down through, where does it? Oh yeah, down to the, okay, so the 4-fold path of the descent of from the mystical to the Gnostic to the magical to the philosophical book, the Hermetic philosophical. So again, this is the groundwork where he's setting up the framework of what the Hermetic tradition is about. The other really important element in this is he talks very much about living tradition and what that is, and how if something is not grounded in a living tradition, if a religion or a thought system is not grounded in a living tradition, which is vitalized by the Holy Spirit, through mystical origins and gnosis, that it will shrivel up and die away, or it will actually bind the human consciousness into a prison of sorts. So that's my summation. Attack anywhere.
I wonder if I could just say a word, and then I'd like Alice or anybody to correct me. Clearly, the tiara is important. Am I right in thinking the very top of the tiara is actually the mysticism and is the magician? And if that is the case, then if I was designing a new pack of tarot cards, I might have a tiny figure of the magician dancing on top of the tiara. That would be a reasonable thing to do, would it?
I like dancing.
Yeah, well, there you are. So that's okay. And then the second tier is when we are actually thinking, gosh, something has happened, and our memory takes control. And that is the first step of gnosis, of actually making sense, beginning to make sense of this wonderful experience we've had. And I think this middle tier of the tiara is the heart, as it were, of this lady. Then the third layer, the lower layer of the tiara, is to do with magic. And magic isn't doing clever things out of our own power, but actually simply letting the initiative of God take over. And if we do this, we will find that remarkable things happen. But it isn't me being clever, it is actually God being even cleverer, sort of within me. And then we forget about the tiara. The final layer is the book she's holding. And as I understand it, we've had the mystical experience, which is really Arcanum 1. We then begin gnosis with beginning to make sense of what we remember of it. This means that we have got to integrate this somehow with our life, and that is where the magical dimension comes in. Not us doing the clever thing, but God doing the very clever things through us. And finally, on the basis of the experience, the memory, and the magic, then we are perhaps able to write out something a little bit more connected, beginning at the beginning and ending at the end, more or less. And this is the Hermetic philosophy. Is this how you understand what Tomberg is saying?
That's a good summation to me.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You said the bottom of the tiara was the magic.
Yeah.
Great. The middle of the tiara was the heart. And rather than the magician, what do you think just about the concentration without effort, since you're using the other?
Well, I think that the concentration without effort certainly belongs there, but I would also say it belongs there because that is the place of the magician, and it is
Right.
it is the magician who is doing that.
Okay.
I liked, I mean, you put wise words into my mouth, which is very nice of you, but they weren't my words. You were saying that the second layer is to do with the heart. That makes sense, but I do not remember it being said. And I would have thought the heart is to do with the magician too, because the magician can waken the heart, I think, and the heart can awaken the magician, sort of depending on what's happening in that particular person. And I think that beginning to make sense of this, again, that there is cardial intuition and that sort of thing, isn't there? So I'm sure the heart is there, but thank you for putting it in, but it wasn't me who put it in.
So the heart is equating to the level of gnosis somehow, because we discussed that it was like, okay, the lower tiara, lower part is magical operation. The one above that is actually gnosis, and then above that is mystical operation. So then you're correlating gnosis with heart. Which,
heart and mysticism.
Review the beginning there.
The beginning there.
On page 42, there was what was helpful for me, the description of these four senses. And the first one, this is just what John is talking about. And I'm going to put these in my words, with his words, but the way I've understand them, is the first is to aspire to experience. That was the key word for me. Experience of the essence of being. And that's the spiritual touch or the mystical sense. And then the second is to learn to understand. That was the key word for me, what you're living through. And this is the Gnostic sense. And then the third is to put into that's the magical sense. And then the fourth is then to become communicable, so you can explain it, so it can pass on, and that becomes the Hermetic philosophical sense.
Can I ask you,
So-
Dory, if you could just repeat the third one, because you broke up for me anyhow during
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to start. So the first one is experience. The second one is to understand. And the third one is to put into practice
Thank you. Yeah.
what you understand. That's the magical sense.
Yeah.
And then the fourth is to become the communicable. That's the book, the Hermetic philosophical sense.
That's lovely. Thank you. Yes.
And then, then he goes on, he says, Hermeticism is the philosophy based on magic, gnosis, mysticism, which aspires to the synthesis of all these planes.
Yeah, synthesis is very important.
And he doesn't like being called a Marxist, does he?
Uh-huh.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the good 40,000 foot view from above of what we're talking about here. I don't know if you want to get more granular than that. There's a lot of granularity here, a lot.
Well, one thing, that he said that this touched me was he talked about the spiritual touch. Now that's that first one, and that is intuition. And this is the relationship between the living soul and the living God. So to put that, that's just so rich to me, to put that in those words. Intuition. This is that link. This is that key link between living and living soul and living God.
And this is certainly something to do with the heart.
Yes, it certainly
Yes.
does.
Let me ask you what you thought about his discussion of discerning between depersonalization and the personality, the individual soul which lives. It was a very important part of his discussion because and it goes back to the distinguishing characteristics of the Christian path. He talked about the wet-eyed way and the dry-eyed way. Did you all get that?
Yeah.
So he's talking about the path of there's two basic large paths of religious belief and practice. One he discerns as being the path of unity, the path of Advaita, which is the path of collapsing everything back to singularity and returning to nirvana. And it's the path of what he calls depersonalization. And that path is what he calls the dry-eyed way, because that is the outcome of that path. The other path is the path of duality, of good and evil, of working with good and evil as true forces, and trying to turn illegitimate duality, which we experience in the lower worlds, transforming them through a third force, good, evil, and then the reconciling force, which is love, working with love as the primary force. And this path is the path of passion. This is the path of the Christian. This is the path of suffering, and it's the wet-eyed way. It's the way of tears, the gift of tears. So what do you think about that? And it's personalized. It is extremely personalized in the individual soul. There's quite a difference there.
You know, the way he describes it is he talks about for those who have chosen the way. So I think there are different ways to the same point. So those who have chosen the way of depersonalization and those who have chosen the way of
You froze up.
choosing. I mean, it's choosing the way. Those who get choose the way.
Or Dory, it also says that for one only finds that for which one seeks.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because I think, but all the ways are good, but it's what is put in your heart to seek. That's what you find.
I thought that he was perhaps slightly unfairly saying that the Christian way is the sort of non-dualistic way in which we are one with God, yet distinct, and both are true, and that enables love to be at the heart of things. So it isn't just swallowed up in one amorphous monism, or chopped into two discrete bits by dualism. And I'm not, and he was saying that I think Hinduism tends to be this absolute monism. And I think most people these days would say, actually, it's a bit more complicated and a bit more non-dualist, just as the Western religion has become less dualistic and more non-dualistic. So I forgot what I was going to say, so I apologize for burbling. But I think he was saying that non-dualism is right, and monism or dualism, in spite of many good aspects to them, are actually a less good way than non-dualism.
Well, also he combines, he says, gnosis without a mystical experience is sterility itself.
Yes.
Not just knowing, just intellectual, just reading, just it's.
And isn't that a wonderful critique of a lot of today's churches?
Yeah.
I mean, if I look at my spiritual development, somehow or other, I just managed to have this little tweak of mysticism and experience, which I think kept me in touch with God and put life into it. But it really is only very recently that I've been able to see that this isn't simply a tiny bit of things, but actually the root of the whole damn lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he has this great sentence in here that says, pure intellect is that which reflects, love is that which acts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So love is motion. Love is that dance you were talking about, John.
Yeah. Well, John, what is, in your opinion, in everyone's opinion, what is it going to take to bring our churches, and not just our churches, but our humanity, back to the key point of love? I mean, we use the word love, we throw it around. We don't really, I don't even think we understand the word love most of the time. How are we gonna, how is that gonna resurface? What's your opinions?
I think we have to understand love as a moral process, and that mere being, the naturalistic view of life, which is where we tend to worship what we call science, and we sort of, which is taking the basic level of being at the level of substance, the level of facts, and then trying to ascend from there. Whereas revelation, moral revelation, descends from above and filters down to us through gnosis, through the higher realms, down to us. That's the essence of revelation. So it seems to me that a lot of people in the world are hung up about one path or the other, the path of revelation versus the path of science, and that neither the twain shall meet. And so I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem, because one is looked at as a purely subjective reality, and one is looked at as a purely objective reality. And then people will lay their moral framework upon that without really considering what they're actually laying their foundation upon. What is it truly that they're laying their foundation upon? So that's how I see the problem now. Is, I am of the camp that you have to be in touch with a living tradition, and not just a tradition, not just the church at all, but a living tradition. And there's a whole body of work that's called traditionalism, by the way, which is it's a definite strain of thought. You might want to look into it. There's a lot of what are called traditionalist thinkers, capital T. And it's all based on this idea that tradition, living revelation, is key to a gnosis, which is alive, a living and breathing religion, a living, breathing relationship that with the human personality to the divine templates.
Is that what you consider the Desert Fathers and Mothers?
I wouldn't consider, no, the traditionalists, no.
Okay.
No, but no, there's actually a school of, they're more modern thinkers. There's a whole school of them called the traditionalists. Rene Guénon, and some of them are controversial. Sayed Hossein Nasr, Nasr, who I've studied extensively, has written a book called Science and the Sacred, or something, Knowledge and the Sacred. It's all about traditionalism. It's all about this. He's a Muslim. But there's a huge body of work. Huston Smith, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right. There's a bunch of them. Let's not go there because it's a huge body of work. But I just wanted to tell you that there is a stalwart group of people who identify themselves as traditionalists, and this is their basic thing. That they believe that true knowledge is only has to be rooted in a living, breathing, inspirited, meaning inspired by the Holy Spirit, tradition.
I liked his description and really sort of the way he describes science. And he says that with science, it begins with facts, and then it ascends from facts to laws to principles, and it's the interpretation of that below. But gnosis is the reflection of that which is above. So it then becomes the last stage is the fact, it's the book. So it's the flip-flop, right, of science from below and gnosis, reflection from above. And honey, you ask about what is love? What does that look like? What does that look like in our churches? I think if we go to his description that love is action, then I think that can get us closer there. So does it mean feeding people that are hungry? Does it mean forgiving? Doesn't it mean doing something? If love is action, isn't there something that we're doing? And that's, forgiving, that's uncontroversial. That's the same in every religion. In feeding people that are hungry, clothing people that need clothes. That to me is love in action. And Mark, you're in the midst. Aren't you in the midst of love in action with what you're doing?
Oh, have mercy. I sure hope so. That's the ideal. I think what's interesting is that I see in this high priestess, there's this formula, I think, that brings us to love in action. And this idea that science begins where this process ends is sort of fascinating. I think that you look at so many of the people that science uphold as these great minds who have built this foundation that now our, much of our technology and society has been built on. Isaac Newton, Galileo, a number of these folks that we point to as these great men of science were actually mystics. And you begin to wonder, at what point did this breakthrough that they had, was it very likely? And I think it's easy to say yes. Were those revelations that they built their great work on received, and as this sort of this spiritual touch, this intuition? I think that there's got to be no doubt that that's where they encountered some of these great ideas. And so it's interesting to consider that this magician is giving us the key to it's drawing us close to that spiritual touch. I think that the concentration without effort, you transform your work into play, your burdens become light. And this is drawing us into a space where we're even able to experience that touch. And in that touch, I think that I was interested in the way that intuition is associated with that. And that as we learn to trust ourselves, that place within that seems to sometimes be, drawing us toward something that's uncomfortable. As we begin to learn to trust that space, that's when it takes root. We experience this, it becomes formed in our memory. And I think that I'm not sure that I had considered the heart aspect of this Gnostic sense, but it seems that if that's part of the process of beginning to comprehend and understand what this intuition, what this mystical experience has been about, that it would take root in the heart. And that's the place where it begins to form and grow. And from that growth comes that magical projection, I think, that as we tend that garden and that experience, that knowledge takes shape and form, that we're going to have this natural outpouring that's going to manifest itself through our lives in ways that affect the world around us. And then, of course, the synthesis of these things and being able to, as he says, make it communicable somehow. I can't comprehend the way in which Tomberg could have digested and set down in book this knowledge, because just having read through it several times, just trying to wrap my mind around it is difficult enough. But it's a testament in itself to this 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 path, this vertical access that then becomes horizontal, I think is expressed just in these letters themselves, having only encountered the first couple. And I really appreciated the way that he expressed and used creation to kind of show how each of these tiers of the tiara, and then the synthesis and expression in book, were wrapped up in creation in these different aspects that seemingly are dissonant or don't work together. So this whole thing's just really fascinating to me, I guess. So I don't know if any of that made sense.
Could you
I have a
repeat the last
question.
part, Mark, the last part you were talking about, the dissolution, the dissonance, would you just weave out that a little bit more?
The vertical,
Well,
horizontal, yeah.
I think just the way that he used these different approaches to understandings of creation, when you look at them separately. See if I can find my notes, because
Talking about his use of the elements, fire, water, breath, all that.
let's see where I find in the book here. He's talking about this, I think, demiurgism,
Oh, demiurge.
emanationism,
Yeah.
and the ex
Pantheism.
nihilo understanding. So yeah, the pantheism, demiurgism, that these are often looked at as different approaches to explain creation that don't necessarily work with one another. That our tendency is to say we must choose and live according to one of these philosophies or understandings of creation. But then he shows how if you can take these ideas and fit them into one of each of these tiers, and then suddenly they work together, but it's because they've each been comprehended as a separate layer of this tiara, or I think what he's referring to as different planes, which I'm not sure that I completely comprehend, or I'm certain that I don't. But he's saying that these things have to be, my understanding is that these things have to be understood on each of these planes separately before there's a way that we can begin to synthesize them, and what he's referring to as the Hermetic philosophy, that then allows us to communicate it, I think probably immediately to ourselves, and then to our peers, and then to the ages. Does that speak to kind of what your question was, Alice?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
So on page 48, the second paragraph, he is saying, since one finds in the Emerald Table the three parts of philosophy of the whole world, and this is the tiara, the magical experience, the Gnostic revelation, and the mystical experience. So that's what he's saying, huh?
He teases, Tomberg does use a lot of philosophical language that you have to start to wrap your head around. The difference between substance and essence is very important here.
Yeah.
Because in what Mark was just unpacking, these different systems of perceiving creation, it's a matter of working with substance and essence, and how do they interact. So what the substance of twofoldness is he brings up fire meeting fire, and that we become all flame. So the physical fire meets spiritual fire, and this meeting of these substances becomes an essence. I'm oversimplifying it, but you get what I'm saying. He wants to talk about the interplay of substance and essence. That's an important piece when he's trying to explain the philosophy of this. So Plato is he is a sort of brought up as the poster child of essence, Platonic ideals, Platonic essences. We all know that, right? You know, that's something. You think of Plato, you think of ideals, right? Aristotle would be the other, I would think, other school of thought, which would be the starting with substances, because we all think of Aristotle as being the founder of the natural sciences, really. So the Aristotelian approach is the approach of working with substances first and foremost, and Plato works with ideals, essences first and foremost, just to put that out there.
No, and it is that the ordering of it, because, and I'm going back to his definition of the science, and he talks about, you know, starting with the facts, and it's the characters of the book of nature. So, you know, so when I'm reading this bowl of sake that I get, you know, every morning, thank you, honey, for that. He talks about, you know, reading a leaf as if it is a book of God. Yes. So we get there. It's just, is it interpretation of that below, or a reflection of the above? Which book?
Yeah, and I think Mark was getting at that, you know, that determining what does a system of thought, whatever system of belief or tradition or thought, is it still, where did it become unhitched from its divine origins, or is it still hitched to a divine origin? And the ones that are still hitched to divine origin will still have a vitality to them. They will still be a live wire of gnosis. I think, you know, like right now we're moving into quantum physics and quantum thinking. And you know, the quantum particles have really strange names like mystery and beauty. And, you know, scientists are naming these scientific processes in quantum theory. They're becoming rather mystical sounding, aren't they? You know, it's interesting. So I feel like the quantum scientists they've tapped back into a live wire that's connected directly to the divine realms. They're getting it. They're getting it on some level, you know. And yet other of the sciences just seem to me absolutely dead. Just absolutely dead in the water. Like they've just completely severed all relationship to, and he brings up an example of that, like cybernetic transhumanism or something, you know, which is mixing up those planes, mixing up the plane of the material and just conflating it randomly with some sort of, you know, psychobabble or psychology or psychic element, and then just trying to force them together in sort of a scientific Frankenstein form. He'll get more into that later. He gets way more deeply into that later. The other really interesting symbol to me in this book, in this chapter, is where he talks about the Tetragrammaton, the Yod He Vav He, which, did you guys recognize that? Mm-mm. Yod He Vav He. Do you remember reading about that?
No. Do you know where that is?
The Tetragrammaton, he starts talking about that on he starts talking about it on page
41
and 42.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, he starts on 41.
I thought that was really interesting because I have a friend, Mary Margaret, who has a recording of, well, it's a CD of a monastic group singing this in a special catacombs in, I don't know if it's Syria or someplace, but it's very, very moving. It's musical. You would love it, Alice.
I know. And this is a very, very powerful Hebrew word, Yod He Vav He, which is, I believe it's Jehovah. It's the name of God. There's Yahweh. Yahweh would be one name, and above that, see on top of 42, Yahweh, where he's got the Yod He Vav He. But there's also Jehovah. But anyway, point is, this symbol is very, very important. And I have read this symbol being unpacked. You have to understand, Tomberg is unpacking it in a way that helps him to develop a model to explain to you. He's explaining his intuition of Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton it's called. The Tetragrammaton is fundamental to the Kabbalah. It's fundamental to, it's a metaphysical, I would call it a metaphysical skeleton upon which things are built.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful metaphysical skeleton. And I have read other analysis. I have read an entire unpacking of the Tetragrammaton, which was talking completely about the principles of male and female, which he talks about here, male and female, masculine and feminine principles and their interplay. And it's a completely amazing essay. Now, this is another one where he's unpacking it here. But to go back, and that's just something I just want, you'll see that again, where he's talking about the Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton. Yod is that spiritual touch. Yod is just that little, the Hebrew letter that's just a little jot like this. It's like a comma. It's like a little tiny touch. And that is Yod, to me, it's one of the most incredible letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it represents to him that spiritual touch of intuition. And then it travels down through He Vav He, He Vav He, which is the manifestation as it trickles down into manifestation in the Kabbalah, through the Sephiroth, through the tree of life, all that. So Yod emanates from the Ein Sof, from the all, from the emanation from the all, and then it trickles down. This is a lot to take in. Would you agree with me? It's a lot to take in.
Yes.
I'm so glad that you did describe that, because I just glossed over it. I didn't have any foundation with it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
A recording of that. I will try to send it out. I don't know that I can, but I will try.
That'd be neat. That'd be neat
Yeah.
to hear that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember what I was talking to you about the metaphysical principles. He talks a lot, he gets into principles a lot. The principle of masculine and feminine. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
He really talks about that in terms of the tunis. I'm kind of backing up towards the beginning of the chapter, where he's trying to tease out tunis, what tunis is. And the I-thou relationship of two.
Yes.
So going back to two, the relationship of the substance of love. Because to have love, you have to have two-ness. And so he goes into the Trinity there. He goes into talking about the Trinity, which is the dance of love between the lover, the beloved, and the love itself, which is the Holy Spirit, the act of love itself. The perichoresis, that dance of love. We've talked about that dance. And that's what sets up, and I was reminded of Cynthia Bourgeau's law of three is mentioned here. I mean, it's sort of implied. When you have two, you have an affirming force, and you have affirming, and then a negating force, and then a reconciling force. So it doesn't really map completely on that, the I-thou love thing. But this is another little complex corner you can get really deeply into. I'm just pointing out these highlights of the chapter for you.
You know, it didn't even occur to me until the very beginning, Alice, when you started giving that summation, that here we are talking about the letter 2. And that's what the first part of this whole chapter was talking about the twofoldness of that. So because I thought, boy, this is such a strange kind of juxtaposition. You have this material, and then that happened in the last chapter as well, where, you know, it was, anyway.
Yeah.
So thank you. I mean, that's so simple, but it didn't, you know, I didn't see that connection.
It is really funny, because not funny, but it's dawning on me, and this is only the second chapter, but it said, in other words, 2 is the divine breath and its reflection. Again, it's action and reflection. And that's the theme that I took away from the first chapter. And he's reiterating it. And I imagine it's going to be through the whole book, where he will bring different concepts back and use them in different ways, so that we can begin to really assimilate the circle or the ball or the sphere that he's trying to build. I don't know, because I've only read 2 chapters, but it seems like that he keeps bringing us back to what he's already said in a different way.
Yeah, you have to pick up, you know, in this kind of a work, he's going to give you these essential ideas and principles. They're axioms, really. These axioms are what he's going to build on. So, you know, I'm used to this. I was a philosophy major. I'm really used to studying text from the point of axioms and then building thought based on it's a mathematical process. It's very, very precise. It's really very precise and demands precision of thought. And it's a great discipline just to try to follow these forms of thought. But I wanted to bring your attention to the 2 centers of contemplation. He refers to 2 centers of contemplation. This is very interesting. And I really got this deeply this time. 2 separate and rival principles, one real and one apparent. One is the origin. This is the origin of evil. So 2 centers of contemplation. One of these centers of contemplation becomes fixated upon itself. This to me is describing the fall of Lucifer. This to me is describing the fall of the angel. Because the angels, if you look up in that, do you see the indented paragraph there on page 32? I'm on page 32, the indented paragraph. So he's talking about numbers related to their base of activity, blah, blah. But he's talking about when we contemplate an important truth, such as the universal power of the Creator, his majesty, his love, his profound light, or such like attributes, we bear ourselves wholly towards this supreme model of all things. I would say to you, this is the angels that are facing the throne of God, the angels who worship and contemplate only God. Okay, do you see that? That's that model right there. That's the model. This supreme model of all things. All our faculties are suspended in order to fill us with him, and we really only make ourselves one with him. This is the angelic path, okay? This is the active image of unity, and the number 1 in our languages is the expression of this unity, invisible union, which, existing intimately between all attributes of this unity, must equally exist between it and all of its produced creations. Now, this next sentence, think about this. But if, after having borne all, return our gaze to ourselves and fill ourselves with our own contemplation in such a way that we regard ourselves as the origin of some of the inner light or satisfaction that this source has procured for us, from the moment we establish 2 centers of contemplation, we separate 2 separate and rival principles, 2 bases which are not linked. Lastly, we establish 2 unities with this difference, that one is real and the other is apparent. I would say that the Luciferic angel, the description of Lucifer, who did not want to worship the Creator, is what happens here. Is two centers of contemplation were established, and the one wanted to contemplate itself, which is Lucifer, and thought of itself as a complete whole. This is, and just to throw that out there, this is the idea of the origin of evil. It's an interesting, which is a very difficult thing to define. This is just a very interesting theory about that. Just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Thank you, Alice.
Yes.
I wonder if I could ask you a question. I have always thought that unlike us, who have a unity with God, but are also distinct from God, angels are pure emanations of God. Now, you can see how creatures like us, where there is a distance from God, where we are able to say yes or no, and all sorts of things follow from that decision. But if you are simply a pure emanation of God or from God, how can you actually say no to God?
Well, that's right. Angels represent the prototype of absolute obedience, absolute subservience to the divine, without question, and they are in perfect alignment with the divine plan. But you see, something happened. And to me, Lucifer is the description of the fall of the angel from heaven. I ask you, what do you think this is? Because there has to be a story of how this happened. And I would say the fall of Lucifer is an archetypal story representing a reality. And there is a fall. There is a fall, which sets up two centers of contemplation. So there's the center of, the angels are just contemplating the one unified source of being. But this other source of contemplation is formed, and it is different and completely separated and apparent. One is filled with illusion, one is filled with reality. Humans, it seems to me, are suspended between these two. As humans, we have the choice. We have to perceive and discern and make choices. This is our work with good and evil. Good and evil becomes these forces, these centers of opposition and action, so that there can be action between perfect divinity and perfect illusion, perfect reality, perfect illusion. And Lucifer is perfect illusion. So it's very tricky stuff. But there has to be a dynamic engine of which the human has to contend, don't you think?
I think I like how he summarizes this dynamic, and he talks about that everything depends on its comprehension. We can decide, key word, in favor of monism and say there's only one soul essence. Those would be the angels. Or we can decide in favor of dualism, and there you have the good and evil, spirit and matter. 3, we can decide in favor of that third point of view, namely that of love, of the cosmic principle, which presupposes duality, and in it, it's non-substantial but essential unity. So you have these 3,
Right.
the monism, the dualism, and love.
And love. Yeah, this is amazing stuff. I'm just, there's layers upon layers. And I tell you, this is what I've gotten out of it for my 4th reading of this letter.
Yeah.
But we can't leave this chapter without having a really seriously thinking about what he's proposing here about duality, love, monism. I mean, these are going to be important axiomatic things going forward, So I just got that intuition about the fall of Lucifer, though. The two centers of contemplation. So we have as above, so below. That's an axiom. As above, so below. So Lucifer represents an illusion of presenting as above, so below. He presents an illusion that these are in relation. But in fact, what evil really presents is a disunity between what's above and below, a discontinuity and a falseness. So there's the false self. We always talk about the false self and all that stuff. This is the origins of that idea, right? So we're going back to metaphysical principles here. Two centers of contemplation, I found a very useful idea. If the two centers of contemplation are separated out on the horizontal axis, let me simplify this into a graph. Two centers of contemplation, if they are set out onto the horizontal plane, this is where you have duality, good, evil. This is where you have that play in the world in real time and space. If the two centers of contemplation are set up on the vertical axis, which would represent what the third eye vision is, the third eye having this twofold, but it's vertical. Contemplation on the vertical axis, which puts one of our centers of contemplation in the eternal and the other down here in the seat of the priestess. She's sitting and she's receiving that other center of contemplation, but she's in alignment with the vertical axis. So as long as you've got this center of contemplation here that is feeding and communicating with the center of contemplation on the lower level of the vertical axis, which is us manifesting here on the horizontal, and where those two places meet, that is where the high priestess is seated, right there.
That is a great place, I think, for us to end.
I found that really helpful, though, Alice and Dory. Thank
It was
you.
very helpful. And to bring us back to that form, back to the picture of the high priestess. Very good. Wow, this was good. So thank everyone.
Amazing what we got done in an hour. I'm flabbergasted, actually. Because when I was thinking about this last night, I was like going, no way.
Could I, maintaining the very high
Dory, you
and deep,
recorded, right?
if I could keep the depth and the height of this session, is Miller still there?
I'm here. I just
You
asked
are
Dory if she
splendid,
recorded this,
because we
I'd
heard
like to listen to it
last
again.
that you have got a wonderful recipe of George Washington's eggnog. Does that ring a bell with you?
I don't have the recipe of George Washington's eggnog. Did you find it yet?
Well, Miller, I had mentioned when we were together last week that you introduced me to eggnog, and it wasn't eggnog just with bourbon, but also with rum. And it was eggnog for breakfast and eggnog later on too. So that's I think what is prompting John's question.
I was just asking for the recipe, yes.
And George Washington apparently made some really walloping eggnog with I think 4 or 5 different liquors in it, like rye whiskey and rum and all these various things. But I think that's because maybe they didn't have bourbon in those days. Maybe they hadn't cultivated the corn crop to make bourbon yet. And so they had to make the makeshift thing. But it's Miller, what did your eggnog consist of in terms of liqueurs?
No, we just used whatever we had. I think I actually bought some little bottles of stuff. I think bourbon and rum, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Dory?
it was bourbon and rum.
There you go.
And
That's
real cream.
I mean, I know you can put all kinds of things in there. I just thought.
Well, thank you, Miller. That was a very inspirational thing you've just said.
So John, are you going to wait until next year, the end of this year, to make eggnog?
It depends how things take me. Yeah.
Yeah. How much you can find. Colonial eggnog, we can call it. The eggnog from the colonies.
You still regard yourselves as colonials, do you? That's very interesting. Yeah.
Just
And what is
bringing it back to George Washington.
Mhm.
I actually think the thing that made it really good is that we had, it was from Jersey cows.
Oh, fantastic.
There you go. Jersey cows.
It just gets more and more complicated, doesn't it?
Look, anything with Jersey cow cream thrown into it is going to be delicious.
I'm with you. I love. We have a creamery not too far from us, and I love. That's really all I'll drink now, and I try to do it sparingly because it's probably not my best friend, but I do love it.
Are you talking about the Mills River?
Yes.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Jersey cows, because I'm
Yeah.
lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
And those of us who are, because the casein is different from that.
Yeah.
I say lactose intolerant, it could be casein intolerant, but it's different and from Jersey cows.
I didn't know that, but that's great. And it's brand new, fresh. They only bring it on certain days. I think it might be Mondays and Thursdays because it's so fresh.
Is that why they say that Irish butter is better than other butter? Is it because of that similar thing of casein?
No, it's Irish butter is some Irish butter is grass finished. They only eat grass.
Right. Okay.
Well, they're grass-fed cows that are not Jersey cows that would still be difficult for people who have an intolerance.
Oh,
So it's not just the grass-fed part.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the Jersey, and look it up, because Dory and I learned this actually this year. We learned it, and when I was in Whole Foods yesterday, I saw, they call it A2, I think. There was this milk carton that said A2, and I looked at it, which is the same as what you get from Jersey cows, but it didn't say anything about the type of cows. Didn't even say where the milk was produced. So I thought that was kind of odd. But that is the difference.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
Well, yeah, we just grounded ourselves back to the earth with cows.